Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Please excuse any dog noises you may hear in the background. If you're new to my channel, I've gotten some new subscribers recently. Welcome. I'm so happy to have you. But if you hear some dog noises, I have two giant schnauzers. And a lot of times I keep them put up when I film videos, but they're not right now. So I'm sorry, but you may hear dog noises. So today's video is a collaboration video with Nicki at Nicki and Bookland. I reached out to Nicki because I'm trying to do more collaborations with people that I typically haven't done them before, and so I asked Nicki if she wanted to do this video with me. I had an idea for books that we thought we wouldn't like, books that we thought we'd hate, that we ended up loving. So I say books that we thought we'd hate, but really, truthfully, I never ever pick up a book thinking I'm gonna hate it and then read it. A lot of times I do pick up a book that I'm like on the fence about, or I think it may not quite be for me, but either it has some buzzwords that are very much intriguing to me, or everybody's talking about it and I just get curious, and so then I do pick it up. And a lot of the times those popular ones that everybody's talking about, they don't work for me, but sometimes they do. So I always want to give myself a chance to try another author, to try something new, to go outside of my comfort zone when it comes to reading, because I really want to try and have an open mind and try and find something that I love that I wasn't expecting to. That's one of my favorite things about reading, is finding books that surprise you. And so I do have some here that surprised me today. Please be sure to go check out Nicki's video and give her a follow. So also, I'm sorry for the long intro. I don't know. I will stop apologizing. Let's just talk about the books, shall we? So the first book that I want to talk about, that I feel like is probably the one that inspired this whole video and that really surprised me truly, is Priest by Sierra Simone. I read this book a few years ago and I was so nervous about this book. And I have Christian beliefs and I really wasn't sure what I was going to think about this book, and I ended up absolutely loving it. And the thing that I loved the very most was the way that the deconstruction, or the attempted deconstruction, of Father Bell's faith was handled. I thought it was so sensitively done. I thought it really explored a lot of the nuance and the gray area. If you've ever been a person who's maybe struggled or had questions with your faith, I was very surprised at how well that was talked about in here and how much I could relate to those feelings, and it just really left me walking away feeling like inspired and closer to God. And I feel like that is something that I was absolutely not expecting to get in this book, because every time I've heard of this book, I hear about the holy oil scene. I hear about how hot it is. I hear about how taboo it is, because it is about Father Bell, who is a priest, and the young woman who comes to confession, who he ends up falling in love with. They have a lot of steamy times and they have a lot of complexity in their relationship, and I was mostly, that's what I was hearing about it. But there were people who I feel like felt similar to I do, and what they're looking for romances, how they want to sort of explore more moral ambiguity and really have depth and emotion to what's motivating these characters to behave in the way that they do. And so that intrigued me so much that I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a try, but I'm afraid. But I did go into this with an open mind, and I do that. I try so hard. I know it's not always possible, but I really do try. Anytime I pick up a book, I try to go in there with like the best faith, with, you know, I want to love this book. I want to like books that everybody else does, but sometimes I just cannot. But this was one of them that I absolutely loved. But I do think that I am a little unique in for the reason that I loved it, and that 100% the reason why I loved this book was Father Bell's struggle with his faith and how that was examined and looked at, and the way that Poppy had a part to play in that. I just found it endlessly fascinating and just beautiful. So this book surprised the heck out of me. Okay, now this book really did surprise me, and I feel like of all the books on this list, this is probably the one that I went into it prepared to not like the writing. The writing specifically I was worried about. So it's Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. I'd been hearing a lot of buzz about this, and I'd seen the cover. I first heard about this book from Sam Reads a Little. She posted the cover and she's like, I've been hearing about this book, and I'm like, what even is that? And she's like, it's basically like Gossip Girl, but in London, like rich people having affairs and stuff, and that's exactly what it is. I really hesitate to call this a romance. I don't feel like it's a romance at all. I feel like it's just fiction following these people, this rich people drama in London, England, basically. So one of the big draws for this book for me, though, wasn't even the plot. It wasn't the romance, it was the writing. I kept hearing everybody talking about how beautiful and lyrical the writing is. Wanda just bumped the camera. Wanda, don't do that. And I was like, you know, writing is something that I put a huge amount of emphasis on. I think that great writing can really make a book absolutely work for me, or it can make it just completely fail. So I love lyrical writing. I love literary fiction type of writing. I am obsessed with the craft of writing. I love examining it. I love breaking it apart. I love seeing different authors' styles. Like, it's just something that I geek out over. And I know that about me, and I know that not everybody does that, okay? But I was just really curious to see what I thought about this writing. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It literally is about these two very rich people who had a relationship, a man and a woman, and he cheated on her, and then it's just like they're constant back and forth. Other people are involved. There's secrets that come out. It's just, that's the best way I have to describe the plot, because it's not a plot book. There's very little cohesive story. You're literally just following these rich people and their manufactured angst and heartbreak as they go about their lives. And yet, I still found it just completely fascinating. I couldn't stop reading it. And that says a lot about me, because it's sometimes hard for me to find a book that I can't put down. I usually feel like I'm very easily distracted sometimes, and I think that's largely because I don't have a lot of alone time, so people are always in my house talking to me, and then I end up like talking to my kids or talking to my husband, and then I end up getting distracted, and I'm like, book? What book? You know? But I will say I was impressed with the writing. What I was most impressed with was how unique it was and the potential I felt she had. I feel like it's pretty rough in this book, her writing style. She is reaching for a very unique sort of literary style of writing that is very metaphorical. She overly metaphors. It's repetitive at times, but it's also very unique, and I haven't really read anything like it before, and that intrigued me enough. I liked seeing how she was going to describe things or put things into words, and I ended up being really fascinated with it. But I will say, I don't know that I could ever recommend this as a romance, personally. I mean, it doesn't have a happily ever after. It is part of a series, but also I just don't feel like it's a romance personally, but I mean, you know, if I would be happy to be proved wrong. Okay, anyway, moving on to the next book. Okay, so now this book, the next 2 books actually have something in them that I go out of my way to avoid, if at all possible, because it's one of my icks. I don't want to read about that. It's giving pedophilia, and that is a teenage heroine and an older man. I absolutely hate that. I don't care if she's 18. I don't care if she's 19. If you show me, I know this is very unpopular because there are a lot of those big age gaps, especially going around right now, or resurfacing, that people absolutely loved. I am not one of those people. I don't find it romantic. I don't find it believable. It's very difficult for me to suspend my disbelief to get on board that an 18-year-old is going to be appealing to a 40-year-old man, and it's not going to be giving jail. You know what I mean? So this book does have an age gap with a teenage heroine, and she is 18, so she's technically an adult, but again, you know how I feel about that. That's still giving me the ick. But the circumstances surrounding her, I felt like, were so unique, with how she was sort of living on her own, the way that her mother was a hoarder and how her home situation was so terrible. And then we have this hero who is just this big, wonderful man who finds out her secret and wants to help take care of her. And so they like have a marriage of convenience. It seems so not plausible. It doesn't seem like, in what world would this work? In what world is there a man who sees this? I'm so sorry, men who are watching this. I don't mean that as a dig, but in what world is there an older man who sees a young teenage woman who is, you know, beautiful and all this other stuff, and his only concern is trying to make sure she's taken care of? I just feel like in today's society, we usually hear the opposite of that, and it goes a different way, and it's gross, and you know. So I was really, really not sure how I was going to feel about this, but I have read and loved another one of Carrie Ann Cole's, Age Gaps, Torn, one of my favorite books of all time. So I knew she had the potential to work for me when she's writing Age Gaps, but I was hesitant. And I was very, very, very pleasantly surprised. I felt like she was a very mature character. I felt like their relationship felt very realistic. I was fully able to suspend my disbelief and get on board with their romance, and it just felt really beautiful. I loved this book, and I was very surprised. Okay, this next one is also an age gap, and it is Dark Notes. So this one is not only a teenage character and an adult, teenage heroine and an adult, but this is also like a school setting, which Like, I've got teenage kids. I've got a kid in high school. I've got a kid in junior high. Like, that gives me the ick to even think about, okay? But I love Pam Godwin. She's one of my auto-buy authors. I literally don't know that I've given her any of her books below a 3-star. I think she's just fantastic, and I've read a great many of her books. But I was very hesitant about this, you know? I was really hesitant about this, and I also knew that there was a trigger warning in here for an animal death, which is always something that I don't enjoy reading. I want to be spoiled for that. If you ever recommend a book to me and it has an animal death in there, animal or child, please tell me about it if you're recommending it to me. But once again, this is the case of an author who takes a trope that could be icky and gross and just like meant to be titillating in a you know, but she handled it with a lot of grace, care, and gave her characters maturity. She gave her a lot of struggles that she had to get through. And, you know, this heroine has a lot of hardship in her life, and she's trying to do the best she can to survive, but also to try and succeed and go to school. And it's a really beautiful story. And I really found the dynamic between the teacher and her to be extremely compelling in a way that I was not prepared for it to be. So I was very pleasantly surprised with this one. I think these are two of the few, hello Wanda, age gaps that I've read that have that big of an age, or I don't know that the age gap was big, but she was definitely in high school in this one. So I loved it. I thought it was powerful and beautiful and deeply emotional. Okay, so now the next book that I have is Barren by Joanna Shupe. So this is the second book this is her first Gilded Age historical romance series, actually. The first one is Magnate, and I read that one, and I liked it. I actually liked it more than I thought I was going to, but this hero that's in Barren, he shows up in the first book as the heroine's brother in that book, and he is such a jerk in the first book. The hero in Barren is such an absolute jerk when you meet him for the first time in the first book that I was like, there is no way I'm going to be on board with a romance featuring him, and there's literally no way I'm going to be on board with him as a romantic lead. I just was like, absolutely not. I hate that guy. And then color me surprised when Joanna Shupe was able to get me not only on board with him as a romantic hero, but to really, truly love and enjoy his character. And again, this is one of those books where, this is one of my favorite books. This is one of my favorite Joanna Shupe books. It's so freaking good. It's, you know, he is lieutenant governor. He's very rich and powerful, and she is a medium trying to support her family, and they have this unlikely love story, and it's just so freaking beautiful. But I wonder if I would have enjoyed this book if I had not read, you know, how terrible he was in the first book, even though that was the thing that made me not want to pick this up, because if there's something I love more than just about anything, it is a redemption arc for a hero specifically. And boy, let me tell you, this had a great one. I loved it so much. One of the best Joanna Shupe books, I think, and it's so underrated. Nobody reads it. Okay, so now this book is another one that I felt like I was really not sure how I was going to feel about it. This is a novella. Novellas typically aren't my favorite. I don't love them. And this is also an erotic novella, and again, that's something that I typically don't enjoy. I don't go out of my way to read erotica. I'm not the type of reader that's going to tell you the spice rating. I don't put a lot of emphasis on that. I just don't really care. If it's not adding to the emotional development or the relationship development of the book, I don't really care how smutty it is. That's just my own personal preference. So this book was on a Twitter thread about books that had intimacy lessons that were also deeply emotional, and everybody kept talking about Curio, and I was like, I'm intrigued. So the setup for this is we have a young woman. She's turning 30 and she's still a virgin, and she's determined. I'm gonna lose my virginity. I'm taking my life into my own hands. I'm gonna do it. So she finds out about this male model and the most famous Paris male prostitute, who is notorious not only for how beautiful he is, but also for how skilled he is as a lover. And so she saves up, she hires him, and that's a decent setup for something to be very erotic. But what ends up happening is that we have this series of nights that they spend together where they're exchanging intimacies, where they're connecting, where they're really having this emotional driven relationship that talks about some of their past history, some of their fears and thoughts of the future. And it was just so beautiful. And I think that was compounded by the fact that the hero in this book was so tender and attentive and loving. And I mean, it blew my mind. I really, really enjoyed this one, and I think that more people should read it, because I haven't heard anybody else talking about this, and it's a good one, y'all. Okay, so now this book is The Winter King. This is a fantasy romance. So I actually didn't think I was going to hate this book, truthfully. I just really felt like, you know, I think the cover is beautiful. It's a bride and a knight. Like, I don't care what anybody says. I think this is a beautiful cover. I've heard a few people say that it looks like their grandma's book, and I'm like, so grandmas are cool, and it's beautiful, okay? So let's just not be hating on beautiful clinch covers. But I was nervous about this one because it's very big and thick, and it also is a fantasy romance, but it's driven by, like, weather magic. Like, that's what the fantasy element of it is, and I was worried. I'm in general pretty hesitant about fantasy romances because they never really strike a great balance for me. The fantasy seems absolutely ridiculous and not developed at all, and it's only like smut, or the romance is not developed enough and the fantasy takes center stage. So I was a little nervous about this one, but I was very surprised at how beautifully it was written, what a great story it was. I really liked how they were like enemies to lovers, and it felt realistic for the way that they were enemies to lovers. I thought that the magic in here was not over the top at all. It was very subtle. It was woven into every part of the story in a really beautiful way, and I just really enjoyed this. And I think that if you are a historical romance reader and you want to try a fantasy romance, I think this would be a really good one for you because it reads like a medieval fantasy, but it's with like light fantasy, but it's very heavy on the romance. So I really enjoyed this book, and it pleasantly surprised me. So alright, my friends, there you have it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Please be sure to check out Nicki's video. And if you have made it this far, how about you leave me a cloud emoji? And I'll see y'all in my next video.